So initially I was kind of interested in the more contemporary Russian games, like the stuff that Anaipakos was putting out, Stalker series, and I got interested in kind of the users behind this. And if you're interested in this, you kind of fall into this like big wormhole, like these like user web forums, these like archival magazines and stuff like that. And what I kind of found out that was this. It was kind of like a paradox, right? Where it's very specific to Eastern Europe, this very particular aesthetic, but it's also very kind of ubiquitous to computing at the time, like when it was first emerging in the 80s and the 90s. Yeah, so this talk is going to focus on Central and Eastern Europe in the 80s and 90s. It's going to focus on this kind of playful collaboration that was happening within these networks. And if you know anything about history, you know, during the, I think it was on late 80s, communism kind of petered out. And people were using these games not as we kind of know them today, as like purely entertainment value. They were using it socially, politically, and artistically. Yeah, so when computers were first introduced, nobody really knew what to do with them. The QWERTY keyboard was a standardization of computing hardware, but computing practices were more fluid. There were a variety of user groups already in place, such as in military bases, data processing firms, laboratories, and they all had varying needs, and different countries had different goals. In America, they were really focused on like personal computing for the individual, but in countries such as Poland, and countries in Europe, they were focused on computing for educational purposes. They kind of wanted to turn around their poor-performing economies, and they kind of thought that computing was their ticket to do that. And with this kind of unknown future of computing in the 80s and 90s, hardware users fulfilled many roles. There were producers, consumers, hackers, activists, gamers, and artists. And while the mythology of communist Europe is one of Iron Curtain, Cold War scholarship has described it as more of a gauze in which exchange frequently occurred between the East and the West. And you know, this previously unavailable electronics and technology was up for grabs. There were social groups like the Chaos Computer Club in Germany. There were anti-establishment hobby clubs in Denmark and the Digital City Project in Amsterdam. But in a country unable to form a game industry due to a lack of free market system, game developers in Czechoslovakia, for example, were forced to be more creative in their production of titles. Programmers independently created and distributed rudimentary computer games and pirated and modified existing games to, they had a kind of like a variety of messages. And these were like literal messages. These games were played on various versions of the ZX Spectrum and the 8-bit Atari. In the months leading up to the Velvet Revolution, which was the non-violent transition of power in 1989, they went from communism to a parliamentary republic in Czechoslovakia. These titles kind of reflected the anti-government stance of the programmers and dissidents. For example, there's the 1988 text adventure Perestroika, and that was named after the current period of political reformation. And this contains an excerpt explicitly inviting the player to participate in this 20th anniversary commemorating Soviet occupation in Czechoslovakia. Another title is 1711-1989, created as an immediate reaction to the events of police brutality. This title includes multiple non-diegetic instances of anti-government slogans and images, with the loading screen reading, "We do not want violence," the slogan of the Velvet Revolution. If you're interested in this, Yaroslav Svelch is brilliant. He introduced me to this. He refers to these personal and communal transmissions as politically charged chain letters wrapped around toy labyrinth.
How do you spell his name?
It's J-A-R-O-S-L-A-V, and his last name is S-V-E-L-C-H. He writes for Game Studies, the website. To continue this thread of social groups using games in alternative ways, I wanted to talk about the subculture called the demo scene. And if you saw Ben Foddy last year, his awesome talk, he addressed the demo scene as well. But for those who don't know, the demo scene is kind of an art and competitive programming group. They did things like anti-piracy fixes, translations, technical demonstrations, and short artistic videos. and the previous example of the non-diegetic political titles, you can kind of consider that as an intro hack. It's kind of like a flashy calling card before a game that shows the group's affiliations. Also, if you played like translated ROMs or ROM hacks, usually there's like that initial kind of flash art in the beginning of it. So from this, what was happening was they began not only modifying the beginning of the games, but they produced. Is this annoying? This microphone?
Yeah. Should bring it closer to you.
Yeah, should bring it closer. Bring it closer.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So instead of just modifying the beginning of games, they started doing these standalone demo projects that kind of pushed hardware to its limits. An example of this is running a 32-bit demo on an 8-bit Commodore 64. It actually sounds really, really neat. I can't really get into. I really just want to show this. The whole presentation is really cool. Yeah, so they had these like kind of competitions where groups would come together and show off. It was very much about. There was an aspect of collaboration with the groups, but a lot of it was like for cred. You know, like my stuff is awesome. You know. And this method of showing off and competing was not really about the game, right? It was about the game technology, and they really utilized it in sort of really impressive ways. And I compare this to kind of early renditions of game jams. And the demo scene was fairly influential for technology and software. Many youth that grew up during this time, they became programmers for production houses, and they also still make games today. You know, some of these guys you'll notice, like Lionhead, Remedy, they're making the Battlefield series. They make Alan Wake. They make Fable, Brothers. And this next one, this is probably a stretch, but I think it's a pretty neat comparison of the influence. The image on the left is from a title called Hollywood Poker Pro from the Commodore 64. The specific intro now is from 1991 from a Poland group called Ethanol Software Incorporated. And I like to think that it really influenced this dancing silhouette campaign of the iPod. And the demo scene is still active today. There are still these competitions. These can be viewed on poet.net, POUET.net. The most famous one is probably Krieger, which uses procedurally generated assets to achieve a small file size of 97 kilobytes. Basically what this is, it's just a generator code and texture creation history. So all these gameplay assets are created on the fly. And for a size comparison, this slide I'm talking off of is a bigger size than the entirety of the game. Really cool. So moving past competition and onto collaboration, there's two neat examples of early peer-to-peer networks I want to talk about. One is the exchange of software via cassette tapes and radio broadcasts, and the other is the exchange of information via infrared lights. This first example took place in Europe across the 1980s. This practice of sharing software over the radio was called down whistling, and it's hard to trace its genesis, but I've read that it's fairly popular in Yugoslavia and Hungary. And the way it works is that demo sceners and programmers would want to spread their content, their stuff. They wouldn't want to share it with friends across the continent. And a lot of times they would do it through mail, through like little diskettes. They would set up hundreds of these things. But if you want to do it faster, you use down whistling. To start, you'd use a ZX Spectrum or Commodore 64 software. You would copy that to a cassette tape. And if you played that on a recorder, it would emit this like high-pitched whistling or bleeping sound. So users would take this tape and broadcast it on these experimental television or radio shows. Then a listener could record that sound onto his own cassette tape and play it on his Commodore, and the software would play. So you can think of this whistle down software as an early version of downloading. It was it's kind of neat because not only is it faster than mail, but you can think of a peer blocking mechanism as like built into it, right? Like if you didn't know how this thing works, you'd just be like, what the hell is this sound I'm listening to, you know? Secondly, in the late 1990s, a free space optical communication system called the RANJA, which stands for Reasonable Optical Near Joint Access, was developed by the Czech Republic wireless community and the company Twibright Labs. The RANJA is an optical point-to-point data link that can be mounted to the house and through infrared light could connect a PC or network to other networks. The reason why this was so popular was that it was made up of like off-the-shelf components, so it was really cheap to make, very prolific, and it's been praised as this kind of political vision, this kind of ideal that turned into a standard or norm. But yet, as we'll see later, with another instance of this, there's always the risk of a product becoming commercialized, and this is something that we kind of deal with contemporary as well. The guy who's like the go-to guy for this is Johann Soderberg, Johann S-O-D-E-R-B-E-R-G. He talks about the friction between the norms of the user community and the commercialization of the technical product, and this kind of both stems from the same innovation process. He calls this the dark net of light. In other words, it's a zone hidden from public view, transmitted across a red beam. For the public staring at a series of red lights along rooftops, they could be confused with like simple decorations or traffic lights, but to members in the know or members of a network, they see not only lights, but they see the transmission of data. So what I consider to be taking advantage of a kind of an open system of peer-to-peer users is the introduction of clone consoles in the 1990s. During this time, there was an eruption of hardware modeled after the 8-bit Nintendo Famicom, with hundreds of cheaply made knockoffs called Famiclones. This stemmed from not only Japan's refusal to export the NES to European regions, but also economical restraints, with some of these consoles costing like 6 months' salary on the black market. With this, the region saw rampant game cartridge piracy and a market economy of game sales and trade. These commodities were so common that they were sold and traded in neighborhood stores, side alley bazaars, and between friends. Kind of what is interesting about this is that gamers weren't aware that what they were playing was fake. They thought these were kind of authentic products because the stores they bought these in called them authentic products. They had like the seal and everything. Let's just go. There's like literally like thousands of these kinds of Famiclones. These are like 2, 3 of them. Known as the Nintendo with yellow cartridges, the Terminator 2 was released in 1992, and it was unique for 2 reasons. It was very widespread. It was popular in Spain to Bulgaria, and it also featured detachable controllers. A lot of these things had like soldered on, so you know if one of your controllers broke, you were basically screwed. You know you couldn't even play it. In Poland, Serbia, and Bosnia, the console clone of choice was titled the Pegasus. And while the majority of these were made of like cheaply designed, easily breakable plastic, this had a really high reliability in design and performance, and it kind of led to this false claim that this was a Nintendo product. And it had radio advertisements and television game shows kind of talking about it. It looks really beautiful, actually. In Russia, the preferred clone console was titled the Dendy, and it was easily the most popular console in the region at the time. Because the NES was never released in the Soviet Union, the Dendy was about as popular in Russia as the Famicom was in Japan and North America. And the company we have to thank for this is called Steepler, and they introduced the Dendy to the Soviet Union. They had television shows, they had advertising, just multi-platforms of this of their advertising campaign. And it made the term Dendy kind of ubiquitous with 8-bit gaming. So if you were a youth in Russia and your friend brought over his Lipa, his Liko, his BT, his Kanga, Simba, Bitman, Subor, didn't matter what it was, you were playing Dendy. These consoles and games were sold in Steepler stores and were branded with an official logo. And it was only years later, after the arrival of the internet, that gamers found out that these items were not authentic. So imagine the surprise when they found out that the title they'd been playing, Contra Spirits, was a port of the SNES Contra 3. Or that Contra 6 was actually renamed Contra Force. Or that Contra 4 and 5, which they spent years looking for, didn't exist. Most of the titles sold in stores were bootleg games with a litany of problems. Games were poorly translated with Samurai Pizza Cats, simply called Ninja Cat. There was anti-piracy protection that made them impossible to complete, such as in Ninja Gaiden or Shadow Warriors. And there were these kind of pseudo-sequels for these original titles, such as Chip and Dale 3. And this, in particular, is it's a pirate ROM hack which combines the Chipmunk characters with the Vietnam-themed top-down action game called Heavy Barrel. And the rodent characters kind of they shoot tanks and stuff. This is actually like insanely interesting. If you were interested in this, I really encourage you to start downloading some of these and checking some of them out. It's really cool the combinations they have. So also in this other show of confusion, the cartridge had 5 little mouse quotes on it from American Tail. And I don't know who the bear is. I don't see from Tailspin. So another example is Darkwing Duck 2. It's a super contract that replaces the main avatar with Darkwing Duck, and enemies with green reptiles and gorillas, I think they are. But it keeps all the stages and weapons and mechanics intact. Subtitled reports of games from 16-bit systems such as Earthworm Jim 3, Aladdin 4, Contra Spirits, and Master Fighter 2, which is an 8-bit version of Street Fighter 2. Some are ROM hacks that added functionality or assets, such as Mortal Kombat 3, which had 56 characters. And there's Pikachu Y2K, which replaces the sprite of Felix the Cat with a Pokemon. Probably the pinnacle of this is Samari, which is it's a mashup that lets players control a spinning Mario through levels of Sonic the Hedgehog. And this was actually pretty cool because this is using Sega games, right? So it's kind of like a double no-no, I guess you can think of it. Anyway, so the way these games were advertised was in... Okay, the way this was shown to the public was through Steve Blur's answer to Nintendo Power. It was called Video Ace Dendy, and it ran for 18 issues until 1995. I'm going to go a little quick. It advertised Dendy Classic, Dendy Junior, rectangular controllers similar to the Famicom's, rounded black controllers similar to the Genesis, and an incredibly realistic gun controller. And this wasn't just like, it wasn't much of a journalistic magazine. There wasn't a lot of facts and stuff. It was mainly one big advertisement. And it had a lot of like confusing imagery that was featured on these pirated cartridges. This is my favorite thing of all of this. This is the cartridge to Batman, and that is an image of Werner Herzog's Nosferatu the Vampire from 1797. So I think what was happening was and I don't know where these games came from, maybe Taiwan or in Russia, they translated it as like literally the Batman. Really, really cool. So misspuns and mismatched imagery was kind of abundant in this first issue, but it laid a framework of what would be like really popular with Russian gamers. It was just filled with like movie advertisements and checklists and just a bunch of ads, but eventually it branched off into game walkthroughs and in-depth reviews. And like I said before, there was thousands of these different Famiclones, but what made the Dendy so popular was Stiepler's business model. He used several different mediums to keep gamers interested. In comparison, there were, of course, other gaming magazines, but they weren't nearly as focused on Western pop culture or advertisements. This is a Polish computer magazine from the late 80s called the Bytek, and it was a reference to the term byte, or the American magazine with the same name. Its stated ambition was to fight against computer illiteracy and in favor of informatics. And a lot of the magazine kind of had entry-level information on programming, computer use, and it had blueprints for hardware hacking. So as a comparison between the two, they might both have a cheats category, for instance, but while Computer Ace Dendy would just have it for like fun, Bytek really wanted its users to understand how the cheats functioned. And you know, they both encouraged people to buy games and game bazaars, right? But one was based on technical betterment and the other one was based on conspicuous consumption. So what can it tell us about how social groups in Central and Eastern Europe function in the present time? Outside of gaming, a tool that continues to the need for decentralization and privacy is Telegram, a free cloud-based mobile and desktop application that focuses on speed and security. It was created in 2013 by the same guys who made vContact from Russia, and it has 50 million active users who praise its end-to-end encryption from government surveillance. There's also WhatsApp, and the founder, Jan Koum, he cites his negative experience of growing up in the Soviet Union as the reason why it doesn't collect personal data or save any of your messages. Yeah, so I think one of the biggest strengths about this software and hardware was that it simply existed, right? These aren't like theoretical possibilities or like, you know, these utopic spaces, right? This is like, this happened, and you can go on archival sites and see it happening, and it's constantly being updated, and it's still occurring in some instances. You know, these are like tangible, real instances we can point to. And I think that, you know, if you're interested in networks, collaboration, piracy, dispersal of information, all kinds of stuff like that, you can look to these platforms for ideas. The groups illustrated in this talk demonstrate a range of dispositions toward technologies. Some are political, some are novel, and some are altogether familiar. You know, while a lot of these were decentralized, a lot of them did fall victim to the predominant modes of commodification and game advertisement. Anyway, these collaborative tools during post-communism, they aren't just influential for file sharing and privacy today, but they can demonstrate that while diversity can refer to things like race and gender. It can also apply to place and time and non-normative use, expression, and social formations. Thank you. These are all brilliant people. Go forth. Maybe one.
Yeah, we're running a little bit behind, so we'll have some questions, 2 questions. So one thing I'm not sure about, we don't have a mic for questions right now. So just people raise your hands for questions.
Hi there. Was there anything from the demo scene that stood out to you in particular? Like, is there anything that you never were able to forget?
I would say using the really advanced 32-bit stuff and making it run on like a Commodore 64 or an Atari. It's really badass.
Was the Identity marketed as coming from the West or from Asia, or was it marketed as a local?
It was marketed as a local thing.
Okay.
So people buying this were like, they thought they were buying like a Nintendo, right? And that was like the sin, right, of Spielberg.
Was there a lot going on before the Soviet Union, or did it really kickstart after?
No, so when the Soviet Union fell, they kind of opened the floodgates of all these products.
Are any of those games available online?
Yeah, totally. You can download all these. I encourage you to do that.
What was the process of reverse engineering those ROMs?
I really have no idea. I think a lot of it was just taking X asset, combining with Y thing, and trying to sign it together.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, if you're interested in ROM hacking, you'll want to look into decompilers and stuff.
Yeah.
It looks like most of these things were mashups and not true ports. Were there any? What percentage was mashups versus a real Super Mario?
Yeah, I didn't show the stuff that translated from the games and were the normal ones. These are kind of outlandish things. Yeah. I don't know the exact percentages, but I'd say a lot of it was for better.
Any original games that were released for the Dendy, for example?
That's a really good question. Actually not sure. I think a lot of it was based on bringing things in from different countries. I'm not really sure if there were any game developers within Russia. That's actually pretty interesting.
Do you know if there's any sort of research on how this widespread piracy and make it more sharing culture affected the way games were played and shared by players themselves?
Yeah, it was very fluid, right? So you would have a lot of your cartridges, and you would beat all of them, and you would trade them with your friends, and it was very active trading. It was you would share the stuff you made, the stuff you played. Yeah, it was very fluid. Great, thank you.